Sadly, 1 in 4 people will think of suicide during their lifetime. I think that was covering England and Wales. I'm Adele, and I work for NHS Greater Manchester, Suicide Prevention and Bereavement Support Programme Lead for Greater Manchester. I've been in this role almost 7 years now. My former role, I was actually a police officer with Greater Manchester Police, but when I saw this role advertised focused on suicide prevention and bereavement support, it really spoke to me. In my policing career, I'd sadly had to, attend a number of deaths and break news to family that they'd, lost loved ones, and that's really difficult. So yeah, coming into this role with the intention of trying to save lives so that, people aren't bereaved by suicide. So when I came into this role, one of the things that I was kind of expected to deliver on was to create a Greater Manchester-wide campaign, suicide prevention campaign that was public facing. We ran a number of focus groups with different groups of people, a group of university students and older people and men, and to say we want to produce a suicide prevention campaign. What would you want to see in that? What would be helpful? And every single group said, we want you to use the word suicide because it's just not spoken about enough. People might be talking about it, but not using the word. And by not using the words, that's part of the stigma as well. That silence is killing people. So that's why we were quite blatant with the name of our campaign is Shining a Light on Suicide. You can't be any clearer. And I think at the beginning, there were quite a few people, I'm sure, who were a little unnerved by that direct approach. But we found it really helpful, and we were listening to our focus groups. That's what they wanted to see. So we launched the Shining a Light on Suicide campaign in 2019. And it's amazing how much it's grown since then. People, what I really want is for everybody in Greater Manchester to be familiar with this campaign. So raising awareness of it is really key. And I don't know if you've looked at the website, but we've split it up so that, for people that are struggling themselves with suicidal thoughts, they can read information and get support information. For those that are concerned about somebody else, they've got a section. And for those that have actually been bereaved by suicide, there's a section for them as well. Yeah, I think up until this year, we've been sharing the statistic that 1 in 5 people will think of suicide during their lifetime, which is a shocking number. And I noticed recently that Samaritans have started using the statistic 1 in 4. And I did contact them just to understand where this had come from. And it's from a legitimate source. So sadly, 1 in 4 people will think of suicide during their lifetime. I think that was covering England and Wales. It is something that can affect anybody, and for different reasons. The reasons behind somebody taking their life are often complex. It's not usually one particular reason. A part of my role as well is I oversee a real-time surveillance process, which means that I get notified whenever we have a death across Greater Manchester that's suspected to be by suicide. And I then link in with whichever locality it is. I'll link in with the suicide prevention lead there, and we look at ways to make sure that there's support available for those affected. But we also learn from what the information we have shared with us. And sadly, I see, some of the issues that people are dealing with, a relationship breakdown. That's often a key one. Bereavement is often a factor as well. People struggling with bereavement. Yes, there can be some people that are unemployed or, maybe facing some disciplinary action at work. Maybe they've got involved in the criminal justice system in some, for some reason. there are so many reasons that people maybe just reach that point of it's the last straw for them. And all that information kind of helps us look at what additional support we can put out there to help people that might be struggling with that. For example, bereavement. And I see a lot of men who've had bereavement. And whether it's more of a man thing where they do struggle to talk about the feelings they have after a bereavement. I oversee as well the Greater Manchester Bereavement Service. Now, originally, when we started the service, it was specifically for people bereaved by suicide. But then after the COVID or during the COVID pandemic, we realised we needed a wider bereavement offer. Bereavement can be a risk factor to suicide. I mean, we know that people bereaved by suicide are at particular risk themselves of suicide, but actually any bereavement can raise someone's risks. So we've created the Greater Manchester Bereavement Service that's been running for some time now for people to ring and just be able to talk to somebody. It's confidential. You know, I mean, I've experienced bereavements myself. I think most people have. And you get to a point, and it can be soon after a death, where people think you should have moved on now and it shouldn't be bothering you as much. And that can go on for, you know, grief sticks with you for life. It's just how you manage that. So for some people, just having somebody outside of their family circle who they can just talk to is what they need. And that's what our Greater Manchester Bereavement Service offer. If somebody needed counselling specifically, they can try and link them into counselling that exists. And there's a national charity called Strong Men that is specifically there for men who've been bereaved. So I'm quite happy to raise awareness of other organisations. You know, my aim is for people just to get support. Wherever you get that support from, just get support, because it can make all the difference. When we talk about things that can lead to someone thinking of suicide, it's not always because they've got a mental health problem. You know, often people think, oh, they must have a mental health problem, and not necessarily. But if you are struggling with bereavement or work pressures, it can have an impact on your mental health. We know that only a third of people who have taken their lives are actually known to mental health services. So the majority aren't known to mental health services. You know, some will go and visit their GP in the months before they take their life. Many of them will go, but they might not have the courage to explain why they really are there, you know, to seek support. So it's not just a mental health issue. It's, you know, it's just, I think, pressures in daily life, which when you think about it, I think we can all understand that there's sometimes when we have more energy to deal with these issues than other times. And I really think it's about the networks of support we have around ourselves. And just focusing on men again. You know, we ran an event a couple of years ago now, at least, talking about men and loneliness. You know, how men, as they get older, their the friends around them shrink because they get busy with work and family life, and actually it's those friendship groups that can really provide support when you need it. And I think women may be better at having those networks. So there's so many things that we need to work on and promote to help us all to feel in a place where we can cope with what life throws at us. I mean, we're really fortunate in Greater Manchester as well that there are so many peer support groups. So I think everyone's heard of Andy's Man Club. You know, there's lots of them, but we do have other men's peer support groups in Greater Manchester as well. And I can't list them all now, but Mentel is one of them. And, you know, you'll probably be able to list others. I think they're really helpful. You know, they're informal places. People might feel more at ease walking in to one of those peer support groups and just having a coffee and a chat than going to see their GP or attending, you know, the hospital. So it's a big part of our campaign is trying to increase confidence in everybody to know how to spot the signs that someone might be struggling and thinking of suicide, and to feel confident to ask somebody directly. So on our Shining a Light on Suicide website, when you go to the menu tab, we have a tab called Learn to Save a Life, and that will take you through to the Zero Suicide Alliance training. Now, that training is free, it's online, it takes 30 minutes, and it will help you. It's quite, a general suicide prevention training that will help you understand what signs to look out for and the importance of asking somebody directly, are you thinking of suicide? A lot of people worry that when you talk about suicide, you're putting the idea in somebody's head, but you can't be further from the truth that we know that for many people who might have been holding this in, having somebody ask you directly and take it seriously and clearly give you that opportunity to talk about how you're feeling, that can be a huge weight off someone's shoulders. And you don't have to be a health professional to help somebody. That's the other thing. I mean, I'm not a clinician. I've never been in a kind of medical nursing, although I work in the NHS. I think it's about just being prepared to have that conversation with somebody and support them in that sense. If you go to the Zero Suicide Alliance website, they've got training focused on veterans. If you support or work with veterans, there's specific suicide prevention training. University students, we commissioned, and there's also training on there for suicide prevention and autistic people. So we know that autistic people are at increased risk. And so that training is about an hour long, but, it's all available for free. So if you haven't done training, please do that. And we're in what we call our month of hope at the moment. So 10th of September, World Suicide Prevention Day, and then 10th of October is World Mental Health Day. So we try to kind of do as much promotion during that month. But it can be really challenging doing this work. But I have been inspired by things. So last year we held a kind of 5-year anniversary for the Shining a Light on Suicide campaign. And it was very much one that we had lots of speakers with lived experience speak. What I love to see as well on our Shining a Light on Suicide website, we add stories of hope. So they're short little films that people have shared their own stories. So that's amazing. The fact that people can be so generous and brave in sharing their personal story on film. So I love it when we share a film, when, someone's kind enough to share their story. We ran a project for people who lost a loved one to suicide, and they each made a quilt square in memory of their loved one. And we call it the Speak Their Name quilt. Do have a look online. And since we created that, other regions took that idea on board and have created their own Speak Their Name quilts. And we're actually all bringing the quilts together in the House of Commons next month, which will be amazing. So working with those people to create that, they found it really therapeutic. And it's a lovely memorial to their loved one. Seeing how effective that creative kind of peer support project was, so we started a choir for people bereaved by suicide, which is called Sing Their Name. There's a bit of a link going on there. And the Sing Their Name choir, we started the beginning of 2023. It's now a community interest company. The choir run themselves. But I think with the choir, people like the fact that they can come and sing, which, as I said, is good for your mental and physical health. And then they can stay and chat over a cup of tea, coffee afterwards. So really proud of that, that groups come together. Yeah, there's lots of things that will be, that I'll think back on. Though when you look at the Office for National Statistics figures, the Northwest are showing us having the highest rate of suicide. And they take that off the number of registrations of suicide that occur at an inquest. Yeah. Now, in 2023, I think we held more inquests in Greater Manchester than other areas, but We are noted as there were 340 deaths registered as suicide in 2023. I know from our real-time surveillance that the number of notifications I get about suspected, deaths that are suspected to be by suicide, we have to say suspected until the coroner makes a decision at inquest. And some of those that I'll get notified of will go to inquest and they won't have an outcome of suicide. But I know over the last 3 years, we've seen a decline in numbers, which I have to, is a positive thing, very much a positive thing. And I really hope that we continue to see that downward trend, really. But still, we are still losing over 200 people a year in Greater Manchester suicide. So there's lots of work to be done and we need everybody's help to do it. Maybe you see somebody in the street that you're concerned about, going up to somebody, asking them if they're okay. A lot of people trying to avoid strangers, don't they? It takes a bit of bravery, but I think it's often harder to ask the people closest to you. Yeah, I think we just need to all feel more confident in asking people. And what's the worst that can happen? If they say, no, I'm not thinking of suicide, then fine. It's really important that we are very sensitive about how we talk about suicide. And especially for those that have been bereaved or affected by it, because it can cause offence. But we don't want to be so sensitive that we don't talk about it, because that's the balance, isn't it?